The Illawarra region is a thin strip of land between the mountains and the sea, 80 kilometres south of Sydney. Home to more than 250,000 people, the region boasts spectacular coastline and beaches, some of the richest coal reserves in Australia and one of the largest steel complexes in the world. A far cry from the days our pioneers came to settle. The first European to discover the Illawarra coastline, and in fact the east coast of Australia, was English cartographer and navigator Lieutenant James Cook, captain of the HMS Endeavour. Land was sighted at Cape Howe on the New South Wales Victorian border, and the Endeavour sailed northwards, mapping the coast as it went. On Saturday, April 28, 1770, Cook attempted to come ashore near Collins Rock at Woonona.
Being now not above 2 miles from the shore, Mr. Banks, Dr. Solander, Tupaia and myself put off in the yawl and pulled in for the land to a place where we saw 4 or 5 of the natives, who took to the woods as we approached the shore, which disappointed us in the expectation we had of getting a near view of them, if not to speak to them. But our disappointment was heightened when we found that we nowhere could effect a landing by reason of the great surf which beat everywhere upon the shore.
Cook's historic landing at Botany Bay the following day seems to have overshadowed the events that took place right here. More than a quarter of a century later, George Bass and Matthew Flinders sail south from the new settlement at Sydney Cove.
The surf that foiled Cook's attempted landing upended their small boat, the Tom Thumb. The following day, they sailed into Lake Illawarra, where they were confronted by the natives. Flinders kept the natives amused by trimming their beards, while Bass and the rest of the crew dried the gunpowder and supplies. Flinders found the natives called the region a Lowry. Illawarra is a derivative of that name. The Wadi tribe had occupied the Illawarra for thousands of years, hunting and gathering food as they moved from one place to another. There were 3,000 of them. 80 years later, only 33 remained. Mickey Johnson was the last leader of the Wadi tribe. In 1896, he was crowned King Mickey and presented with a brass plate to hang around his neck to signify his kingship. For many years after the settlement at Sydney Cove, nothing was done to open the Illawarra. The overland journey from Sydney to Stanwell Park and the Shoalhaven River was just too difficult. But eventually, the rich stands of cedar proved so inviting that the illegal timber getters became the first white people to live and work in the region. Cedar trees grew on the hills and the mountainsides, and the softwood was so easy to cut and in great demand in the new colony. Cattlemen seeking good feed for their stock began grazing cattle in the district between 1803 and 1817.
However, the father figure of white settlement in the Illawarra was Dr. Charles Throsby. Farmer and explorer, Throsby came to the region, known as the Five Islands District, in 1815. He was in search of good pasture for his starving cattle.
It wasn't long before the word of the rich Five Islands District spread around the growing colony, and many others followed. The first land grants were made in 1816. The Illawarra provided Sydney with much of its dairy produce. The village of Kiama and the surrounding rich pastures of the Jamberoo Valley produce some of the finest dairy products. Kiama, the gem of the Illawarra, is famous for its harbour and blowhole. Just to the north lies Shell Harbour, a popular fishing and tourist spot. Known as Yerrawa by the Aborigines, it was the vast quantities of shells buried in ancient Aboriginal middens which gave the town its name. Settlers arrived at Shell Harbour in the 1840s, and a village developed around the small port. Private developers were quick to see the area's potential, and in 1851, a private township was laid out and called Peterborough, after a town in England. However, the name Shell Harbour had been used for so long that Peterborough was abandoned when the village was given a post office. The Illawarra is famous for its high-quality coal produced in the northern half of the region. Coal was discovered by shipwrecked sailors making their way back to Sydney over land. George Bass was sent to the Illawarra to search for others from the shipwreck and to affirm the presence of coal. Bass saw the coal seam. Little did he know of the black treasure that lay within the escarpment. first successful Illawarra coal mine began in 1849 at Mount Kira. Coal was loaded into small carts, pulled by horses through Wollongong to the harbour. Other mines were soon to follow at Woonona and Bellambi, with Mount Kira producing the most coal. The Bulli coal mine was opened in 1863 and rails were laid to Bulli Point where a jetty was built. Soon, mines opened at Corrimal, Mount Pleasant, Clifton and Mount Kembla. All were connected to ports by light railways, and the Illawarra coal was shipped to Sydney, North America and to China. However, a number of those small vessels came to grief off the rugged Illawarra coastline, and the lives of many sailors were lost. On March 23, 1887, one of Australia's worst mining disasters occurred at Bulli, when an underground explosion killed 81 men. It was just a portent of things to come. 15 years later, a mine explosion rocked the small village of Mount Kembla where 96 miners were killed. 2 rescuers lost their lives when they were overcome by gas, a sinister, lethal foe trapped in the coal seams. In November of 1965, again at Bulli, 4 miners died as a result of an underground fire caused by the ignition of gas. Again in July of 1979, an explosion of gas killed 14 men at Appin Colliery, northwest of Wollongong. Ever since the early Bulli mine disaster and the Mount Kembla mine explosion, miners have been very cautious of gas. The risks and hardships forged strong bonds between the men working the coal mines, bonds that have transformed into a strong union movement today. In late 1917, striking coal miners gathered at the Wollongong police station following the arrest of a fellow unionist, Fred Loudon, for the attempted murder of a loyalist railway fireman. The miners were on strike in support of railway and tramway workers in Sydney. The industry was at a standstill for several weeks. Miners faced starvation, and those who lived in huts owned by their bosses were thrown into the street by police. Loudon was later proven innocent, and the miners went back to work. In 1957, angry Illawarra coal miners rallied in Sydney and took their protests over dismissals and the closure of mines to the steps of State Parliament.
Miners meet in Sydney to protest about dismissals, closing of mines and the sale of 2 mines by the Joint Coal Board. Some 700 miners and 40 wives meet in the gardens not far from Parliament House, where they are addressed by Miners' Federation officials. After some of the women have their say, the men march towards Parliament House where they want to send a deputation to the Premier, Mr. Carl. Police are out in force, but the march is orderly and only officials mount the steps of Parliament. The Premier agrees to see the miners' leaders, but refuses to lead a union deputation to Canberra. Instead, he'll ask for federal financial aid for men out of jobs on the coalfields.
History was to repeat itself in 1982. Mass retrenchments on southern coalfields and an underground sit-in at Camira Colliery led frustrated miners to storm the doors of federal Parliament.
And in a picnic atmosphere, they marched on Parliament House.
Why have you fellas come to Canberra today?
To protect our jobs, mate. To protect our jobs.
And how will you do it here?
By protest. Show Malcolm Fraser that he can't put the boot in us all the time.
What do you hope he's going to do?
Well, he should change the bloody system. So it's wrong, isn't it? And bloody thousands are unemployed, eh? Cheap imports from overseas and, oh, God, striking.
But by the time they reached Parliament House, their feelings were running high.
After a 6-hour train journey from Wollongong, the miners and the steel workers weren't prepared to take no for an answer. They burst through the steel barricades lining the footpaths and raced up the steps of Parliament House. By sheer weight of numbers, the doors gave way and they poured into King's Hall. And there they took up position, threatening to stay until Mr. Fraser saw them.
While police regrouped across the smashed doorway, the invaders remained in King's Hall. When the Speaker, Sir Billy Snedden, came to try to restore order, he was told it was not his job that was in jeopardy. Finally, a delegation of 5 was shown into Mr. Fraser's office.
There is no doubt the actions of unions have improved the lot of miners, but it's been at great pain and expense to themselves, their community and the nation. Today, huge machines have taken the place of picks and shovels. They extract millions of tonnes of the black ore from the rich seams. From the pit tops, coal is carried by road and rail to the modern Port Kembla coal loader complex. It is loaded into enormous bulk carriers destined for overseas markets where it earns valuable export dollars for the local and national economies. In the early days, Belmore Basin had been the region's principal port. Today it offers anchorage for a large fishing fleet and pleasure craft.
Coal was the major factor for the establishment of the iron and steel industry in the Illawarra. The region produced good quality coking coal, and it was for that reason that Charles Hoskins decided to move his operations from Lithgow to Port Kembla in 1928. It was the beginning of the giant Australian Iron and Steel, the principal subsidiary of BHP and the dominant industrial entity in the Illawarra.
The first steel was produced at the new Hoskins Port Kembla Works in 1931 with a total workforce of 800. In that same year, Hoskins Iron and Steel amalgamated with two English firms and became A.I.&S. The company was sold to BHP in 1935, and the following year it began a major extension program with total employment reaching 3,500. Production rapidly increased at the steelworks, and the Second World War gave opportunities for improvement and further employment.
We're the steel workers. I'm one of the fellas you see there. Any one of them. Makes no difference. That's how it is on this job. One man's as good as another. So long as he knows his job when the metal's running hot, he's okay. Steel making's bread and butter to thousands of us here on the coast. My dad was a steel worker, and so am I. Not much choice if you're born around Port Kembla. It's steel or the mines. You can take your pick. According to books and newspapers, we're pretty important people. We fashion the material of our civilization. Well, maybe. But to us, steel making's just a job. Tough work, but pretty sometimes. Until we punch the ticket and stick it in the rack, we're just numbers. Boilermakers, blacksmiths, engine drivers, moulders, miscellaneous workers. Miscellaneous is right, but once outside the gates, a man's his own boss. At least until he gets home. This used to be a dairy farm. The coast was all cow country, but the cows got pushed out. Now it's steel. That's progress. We've got population problems down here. We're growing too quickly. Some of us live in hostels. Good hostels too, some of them. Steel workers are shift workers. So there's always somebody trying to sleep. And always the kids won't let you. And housework, if the mums had a union, they'd go on strike. But it's not all that bad living and working on the coast. This is town to us, the Gong. Wollongong to you. There's big money growing up around here. What comes in our pay envelopes is spent here. But they still think they're too good for us. We pay more for a house and land than some of the old cow cockies paid for their whole shebang. farm, cows and all. You can buy anything in the Gong, cash or terms, all city comforts. And it's not just movies for the mob either. We've got culture. Classy or brassy, depends how you like it. But the Steelworks band is champion. All the best judges have said that. But why doesn't somebody write music for a broken ship? Punch and Judy's always on the job too. So are the unions and the bosses. We're in the middle, punching the Bundy and taking the knocks. But if you're going to be shoved around, it's much better to music. And if you don't want to drink, there's always fresh air and the dogs to exercise, if you like dogs, and we do. But you can't get away from it. The work's always waiting for you. Punch the Bundy. Back to the mill. From thousands of homes, thousands of men of all kinds, but all one kind of man, the steel worker.
Many monuments stand and tell the stories of the men of the Illawarra who gave their lives in war. They fought and died in the battlefields of Europe, Africa, Asia and the Pacific.
The first fatality of war was Trooper Frank Andrews in the Boer War. This memorial to Trooper Andrews was first erected near the town hall, but is now relocated here in McCabe Park.
But it was the Great War that fired the patriotism of the new nation of Australia. Our young adventure-seeking volunteers joined contingents from New Zealand and were shipped overseas. Many landed to their disgust, not in Europe, but in Egypt, and then to take part in one of the fiercest and bloodiest battles in the history of the Great War, Gallipoli. Peace was to return, but not for long. War broke out again. Hitler's forces were storming across Europe, and on the 3rd of September in 1939, Prime Minister Menzies broadcast the grim declaration of war.
Fellow Australians, it is my melancholy duty to inform you officially that in consequence of a persistence by Germany in her invasion of Poland, Great Britain has declared war upon her, and that as a result, Australia is also at war.
The Second World War drew all the able men industry could spare. The older men formed the Volunteer Defence Corps, nurses joined the forces, and women signed on for Army, Navy and Air Force work. Those at home worked for the Red Cross, for comforts funds for our soldiers overseas, and the families of those men who died in battle. On December 7th of 1941, a day that would live in infamy, according to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, war erupted in the Pacific when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Hostilities were now closer to home, and measures were taken to protect the Illawarra coastline. Guns were installed to protect Port Kembla and the steel industry, an industry vital to the war effort, forging steel plate and gun barrels for aircraft and for ships. And also on the home front, an innovative man named Evelyn Owen developed a new weapon for the battlefields.
Mud, the common enemy of both sides. It slowed up the march and gummed up the guns, until a 27-year-old Wollongong firearms fanatic and brilliant inventor, Evelyn Ernest Owen, came up with an answer. lightweight submachine gun, sturdy and cheap, immune to mud, capable of firing 800 rounds a minute. The Owen gun, an Australian invention which proved to be the most reliable weapon in all conditions used in World War II. The Australian-designed Owen submachine gun pitted against an American Tommy gun and a British Sten, and the Owen brought home the bacon, a result which gave Army Minister Percy Spender quite a kick.
In latter years, the young men of the Illawarra were again called to serve their country in other theatres of war, Malaya, Korea and Vietnam. However, Vietnam veterans returned home to a welcome not so enthusiastic as that given to other war heroes. Vietnam was the television war, and the question of Australia's participation seriously divided the community. It would be almost 2 decades before Vietnam veterans received the recognition they deserved when they led the 1987 Anzac Day parade through the streets of Wollongong.
At Mount Kira, on the rugged south coast of New South Wales, Boy Scouts parade at the opening of a camp, unique in its surroundings and its appointments, which is designed to form a magnificent central rallying point. The Governor, Lord Wakehurst, as Chief Scout of the state, tugs at a lanyard, breaks out the national flag, and by this ceremony declares the camp open. That makes them all stand up and cheer. The camp, covering 560 acres of mountain country, is the gift of one of Australia's greatest industrial enterprises. The swimming pool's right on top of the world. So are the kids, who find camp life more glorious than a millionaire's existence. Come and get it. Lads who at home have to be driven to eat their spinach discover a new relish in tucker, hot out of the camp oven, or cool from the camp larder. Wherever you look from the dining room, the view's perfect, from the easterly aspect of the mountains to the southern elevation of a sausage.
The Illawarra is one of the most multicultural regions in Australia. People from all corners of the globe, for one reason or another, have come to make this their home. The first migrants were men, women and children from war-torn Europe. Many had lost their homes, their families and possessions in the war, and some had suffered the horrors of concentration camps. They were followed by many others seeking a new life and brought to the region under various government immigration programs of the 1950s and 60s.
This is a truly Australian city, friendly but also cosmopolitan. People of many nations live here, from England, Italy, Germany, Ireland, Scotland, Holland. In fact, well over 30 different European nationalities are represented in the city's population. Australians are not supposed to show any great national emotion, but I found this not to be the case when I attended a naturalization ceremony where over 100 migrants took full Australian citizenship. A simple ceremony, but ever so sincere, with the mayor of the city, assisted by the town clerk, presenting each new citizen with their certificates. A ceremony where a true spirit of fellowship prevails, a spirit that exists in the whole community, I found. Settling into the way of life of this new country is best achieved by the children. A happiness and good fellowship exists among the young regardless of their birthplace. An example that we older folk would do well to follow, perhaps. The educational pattern is the same at both the steel cities of Australia. In fact, I understand education is very similar throughout the whole country. Excellent school buildings, kindergarten, primary and secondary, where the children learn not only about Australia, but overseas countries as well. At both Newcastle and Wollongong are large technical colleges, university colleges and teachers' colleges. You can see you really want for nothing as far as education for your children is concerned. The city of Wollongong is on a coastal strip of land between the mountains and the sea. At every turn of the coastline are surfing beaches and many swimming pools. Along the mountain ranges are picnic spots, accessible either by walking or by car. A near perfect blending of bushland and sea. Housing, perhaps the most important aspect of life in a new country, is still a problem, but a problem that's being beaten. There are hostels where newcomers like me can stop, and this allows one to look around, find your bearings and plan for the future. It doesn't take long if you have a determination to succeed. In both steel towns, men today are clearing their own land, digging foundations for their homes. You have to save money to pay a deposit for land and a house, and the balance can be obtained from a cooperative society or a bank, and you can pay the money back over many years. This is the best way, much better than just paying rent because you're buying your future home. Here's a fair example. This man is typical of many. He came to Australia with his wife and one child just on 10 years ago, with no money to speak of, but by hard work and saving, he has today his own home. Well, he's paying it off. Being a good worker in the steel industry with a steady income, he was able to arrange for a loan from a building society. Now today, he has 3 children, a lovely home, a car, in fact, most of the essential things that help make enjoyable living. None of them have been obtained easily, but only by hard work, sacrifice, and a will to succeed. The 3 essentials for anybody who is taking up a new life, and plenty of people have done just this. In the steel cities, there's plenty of relaxation, too, regardless of the way you like to relax. Hotels and clubs provide good entertainment. There are clubs of all descriptions, social, sports, music, and many others. Here there's a complete mixing of people, regardless of race or creed, and all these clubs are glad of new members. We'd all heard of Australia as a land of sunshine, and Australians as a people who love outdoor life. Well, it does rain sometimes, and not all Australians are 100% outdoor types, but I found that the description is basically true. After all, Australia has an excellent temperate climate. On the beaches of the steel towns, anyone from anywhere can have good, clean fun. The surf clubs that do such a mighty job and save the inexperienced surfer from danger and possible drowning run competitions. They're called surf carnivals, where the club members are able to perfect their life-saving techniques and provide the public with excellent and sometimes exciting entertainment. In fact, as I watched one carnival, it made me think how it typified the Australian way of life. I was interested to find a great similarity between Wollongong and Newcastle in more ways than one. You could almost call them twin cities, for just south of the Port Kembla Steel Works is Lake Illawarra, a large placid stretch of water where those who like the thrill of speedboat racing or the art of water skiing can spend many an hour at their sport. Another fact of interest is that all the football codes are played with remarkable vigor. There are even teams whose members are all migrants. But if the weather is wet or fine, you can take into yourself and your family, if you like, to modern and well-conducted 10-pin bowling alleys, where many of the local champions are people from the Northern Hemisphere. Australians are truly a hospitable people, regardless of where you come from.
Today, the Illawarra lives in harmony with people of more than 70 nationalities.
Glorifying the Australian girl, and in particular the glowing girlhood of the south coast of New South Wales. At this 150th anniversary celebration carnival on Wollongong Beach, Miss Illawarra is being selected in a most beautiful surf girl contest. One of the judges, Virgil Riley, noted artist. They asked him to adjudicate because somehow he always draws in curves. He's aided in his task, and who wouldn't swap jobs, by Sir Harry Budge and Mr. George Cross, Cine Sound's casting director. If Virgil Riley knows all the curves, he knows all the angles. They couldn't spin the job out any longer. They select the winner, Miss Illawarra 1938. Cheers, hips, hips, hooray! Ribbon of big goes to charming Jean Watson of Port Kembla, Suite 17. Miss Longstaff of Ostermer's second, and Miss Duncan of North Wollongong was third. Miss Watson moves on in triumph, and to the screen test, with which Cine Sound will give her her opportunity of starting towards stardom. And Miss Illawarra leads the bevy of beautiful contestants. Excuse me, but does anybody know what time the next train leaves for Wollongong?
The Illawarra's greatest natural asset is its beautiful beaches. They are the favourite summer attraction of board riders, body surfers and sunbathers. And every summer gets hotter, those tans get browner, and those bathing suits get smaller. Quite a change from the days of the neck to knee.
In the early 1900s, the popularity of swimming and surfing grew on Illawarra beaches. The number of drownings also increased. This led to the formation of a voluntary group of able surfers to watch over bathers, the forerunners of the surf lifesaving movement. The Surf Lifesaving Association, as we know it today, came into being in 1908 when the Wollongong Surf Bathing and Lifesaving Association was formed. Members were known as the Water Rats, and it was their job to keep the beaches safe. As more and more people took to the water, other surf clubs were formed in the Illawarra, and surf lifesavers tested their skills against one another at carnivals.
Surfboats are ready at Bondi for the Ampol Marathon race to Wollongong. Lord Mayor Jensen is there to start them on the 30-mile row, and it's mighty rough right from the word go. They'll make for Stanwell Park the first day, but what a grueling business it is, with mountainous seas buffeting them all the way. Even their escorts, which have engines, find the going tough. And despite weeks of training, 16 of the 31 starters are forced to retire through injury, bruising, and even damage to the boats themselves. Cook's Hill and North Staine are still in it, though. There's the North Bondi boat, and shipping plenty of water by the look of it. They're competing for £500 in trophies, but by the second day, they must be wondering if it's worthwhile. 15 of the boats make it, a real triumph of courage, endurance, and seamanship. The crowd sees the crew from Cronulla come in to win the marathon. Their boat was damaged on the first day, so they borrowed the North Wollongong boat after its crew retired. 30 miles in 11.5 hours. Cronulla wins a marathon. Tough rowing in some of the season's most violent seas.
Surf clubs from all over Australia parade at North Staine Manly in the Australian Championship Carnival that has a climax of thrills and near disaster. The Corrimal team, smarter soldiers, stride up the beach in the march past. A solid bunch of young men they are. Lifesavers on Australia's coastline have a wonderful record of voluntary service, but this is their big sporting day. Beach beauties capture the cameraman's eye, but only for a moment. The surfboat races are on, and there's excitement coming up. They've handled plenty of bigger seas than these, but this one has a queer turbulence with steep-sided waves and a dangerous inshore bank that brings many boats to grief. Riding the waves, and as bumpy a ride as you'd get in any rodeo. But they stay with her by seamanship that comes from constant training. Yes, it's a thrilling sport, but dangerous. Despite the sweepman's most desperate efforts, the waves swing the boat side on and then will throw them over as they reach the inshore sandbank. In she comes, down goes the nose. Get up, crew. She's going to make it, but don't ask us how. This one's not so lucky. She's dubbed hard. The crew is thrown out and the sweep oar crashes on one man's head. Teammates from the Coleroy boat grab the unconscious man, Wal Beanson, and take him ashore through the boiling surf. A real rescue drama that shows just how full of danger the job of the lifesaver can be. Hurriedly, a stretcher is brought so Beanson can be taken to hospital. He's one of 3 men badly injured. 40 are treated on the beach in this dramatic carnival. But despite injury and capsizes, the boat races go on. Men against the surf. There's nothing foolhardy about this. Often they have to go out in rough seas to save lives. Discretion is often the better part of valor. Hold everything, the skipper's overboard, and the boat heads for the beach out of control. It's a nasty, unpredictable sea, the tail end of a cyclonic disturbance. It's a bad day indeed for the boats, but there's thrills aplenty for eyewitnesses of a display of skill and daring that cannot be matched anywhere but in Australia.
These are the Iron Men of today, who carry on the tradition of surf lifesaving on Illawarra's beaches.
Park north of Wollongong is world-renowned for its scenic views of the Illawarra and the wind currents that make Bald Hill one of the best launching pads for hang gliders in the world. Young adventurers launch themselves from the treeless hill. Strapped to their kites, they are a living reminder of the endeavours of aviator pioneer Lawrence Hargrave.
He flew box kites as he studied the theory of aeronautics. He invented engines which he hoped would help his box kites to fly, and proved their lifting power when a kite arrangement lifted him several metres into the air in 1894. Lawrence Hargrave's experiments and inventions helped in the development of the aeroplane. Another milestone in aviation when Sir Charles Kingsford Smith, already famous for his trans-Pacific flight, took off in his aeroplane the Southern Cross from 7 Mile Beach in 1933 to fly to New Plymouth in New Zealand. He landed in New Plymouth in the same afternoon.
Back to the coast again, this time to Wollongong. Tens upon tens of thousands gather to give the visitors perhaps their most informal greeting so far. The Queen and the Duke seem more relaxed than they've been. At the school children's display, pretty blonde Margaret Buttle, 15, captain of Wollongong High School, was chosen to make a speech of welcome. The gusty 20-mile-an-hour southerly was embarrassing. Nevertheless, Margaret was equal to the occasion. But it's a little more difficult for the Duke. Margaret couldn't hold the speech and her hat, so left the hat to the elastic. But the highlight of the day for the kiddies comes as the Queen and the Duke drive among them. And all too soon for Wollongong, the royal visit is over. The children are still waving as the royal car drives from the arena, leaving behind memories that will live forever.
Local government has served Illawarra residents for almost 140 years, although the first attempts to establish a local governing authority founded in 1843. The Illawarra District Council, as it was known then, was dissolved after less than 7 years' service. Another attempt at local government was made when the municipality of Wollongong was proclaimed in 1859, the first in New South Wales, to be followed by Shell Harbour and Kiama several months later. Wollongong was proclaimed a city in 1942, and in 1947 it amalgamated with the Shire of Central Illawarra, the municipality of North Illawarra and the Shire of Bulli to form the city of Greater Wollongong. In 1959, the citizens of Wollongong celebrated 100 years of local government. In the 1950s, the council chambers were constructed to house the administration offices of council and opened in 1956. This was to be followed by the construction of a new town hall with the demolition of the civic theatre to make way for a new venue for public entertainment and ceremonial events. This new building was officially opened in 1965. The responsibilities of local government broadened to cope with the expanding city, and the need for a larger council administration centre was well overdue. In 1987, Wollongong City Council moved into an imposing multi-storey office block not far from the origins of local government in the Illawarra. The impressive structure and the new Commonwealth Government offices create a civic precinct which leads to a performing arts centre. They are part of a multi-million-dollar building boom which has swept the region. It is a result of efforts by civic, union and business leaders to pull the Illawarra by its bootstraps from the economic demise of the early 1980s. It began with the signing of an historical agreement between the Kern Corporation and the Wollongong City Council, which led to the development of a new shopping centre and mall in the heart of the city, worth more than $40 million. It has also been the catalyst for many new developments designed to attract more tourists and business to the Illawarra.
For more than a century, this steel lighthouse has stood the test of time and witnessed great changes in the Illawarra. And in recent years, the people of the Illawarra have worked very hard to shed their industrial image. And while still recognising that steel and coal have been the foundations of the Illawarra's fortunes, they realised they must move ahead into the new century with enthusiasm and willingness to be part of progress and development for the future and for that of future generations.
Together we pulled through some hard times. Now take a look around. Don't it make you proud?
It's a friendly place with a smiling face between the mountains and the sea.
So come on everybody, let's show the world how we feel. Illawarra, let's celebrate. Let's get together in 88. Let's join the celebration of a nation. Illawarra, let's celebrate. Let's get together.